Have you ever had it all and still lost everything because of a single wrong choice? John did, and the price was far too high. At 50, he was the picture of American success. Sharp suit, confident smile, luxury cars in the garage, properties across 3 states, and a surname that opened doors. He was the pride of the family, especially his mother, a humble woman who used to wash clothes for others while he was still dreaming of owning his first plot of land. But that night, in a bar in Ohio, between a glass of whiskey and a glance that lasted 2 seconds too long, his story began to unravel. It wasn't out of malice, nor lack of intelligence. It was loneliness, vanity, neglect of what mattered most, his essence, his family, and the principles that had brought him that far. If you resonate with stories like this, take a moment to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. It really helps and ensures you never miss a new story like this one each week. Now stay with me, because understanding what led John to lose everything might help you avoid the same mistake, or help you find your way back if you're already on that path. John was born in 1960 in a wooden house in rural Virginia, with no paved streets or hot water. His father was a tractor mechanic, calloused hands, few words. His mother, a force of nature, up at 4 a.m. to wash neighbors' clothes and still found time to teach the children to pray before bed. He was the eldest of 3 siblings. From a young age, he learned the world gives nothing for free. At 12, he was already helping on building sites. At 17, he left home with a worn-out suitcase and a notebook full of land prices and ideas. It was in Ohio that he planted his roots. He started small, selling mobile homes, then renovating abandoned houses in Columbus suburbs. He had no formal education, but he had instinct. He knew where to invest, when to buy, when to hold. And most importantly, he knew how to negotiate. He spoke firmly, looked people in the eye, and kept his word. Back then, that was worth gold. By the early 80s, John had his own construction company, a loyal team, and a solid marriage to Mary, his wife since he was 22. They had 2 children, David and Clara. Sundays at church, barbecues in the backyard, a table full of plans. While many sought shortcuts, he stacked years of hard work. His empire grew. Shopping centers, housing developments, apartment blocks. John became a reference in the Midwestern real estate market. He featured in magazines, won awards. His name was on signs along the busiest avenues, but inside a void was growing, silent. Over time, success came at a cost. Absence at home, endless meetings, trips with no return dates. Mary felt it, the children noticed, but John thought it was all part of the sacrifice. "I'm doing it for you," he'd say, not realizing the most precious thing was already being left behind. That's how he reached 50. Wealthy, respected, but increasingly hollow inside, until one ordinary night, in a roadside bar in Ohio, he met her. It was meant to be just a quick stop. John was returning from a meeting in Toledo. It was past 9 p.m. when he saw that bar, yellow lights flickering at the entrance of a side road. He was tired, his mind racing, and decided to go in to unwind. He ordered a whiskey, sat alone at the counter and stared into his glass, replaying the day in his head. That's when she appeared. Blonde hair, confident smile, direct gaze, the kind of woman who knows what she wants and isn't afraid to go after it. One thing led to another, and within 20 minutes John had forgotten about his wife, his children, his fatigue. He laughed like he hadn't in years, felt desired, alive, invincible. For a man worn out by his own routine, that was poison served with charm. Eliza was the opposite of Mary. While his wife was serene, modest, home-loving, Eliza was impulsive, provocative, full of ideas about freedom and starting over. In the months that followed, the meetings continued. First in secret, then increasingly bold. Before long, John was paying for her flat in Columbus, funding trips, buying expensive gifts, all under the guise of extra work and business expansion. But lies come at a cost. Mary found out 6 months later. She saw a credit card bill with a dinner for 2 in Chicago. During a weekend, he claimed to be in New York. She didn't make a scene, didn't scream. She just looked him in the eye and said, "You are no longer the man I married." That sentence haunted him for years. John tried to explain, but he was spellbound. The idea of starting over with Eliza was too thrilling. He asked for a divorce, left home, bought a diamond ring, and moved in with the mistress. He thought he was trading lives. In truth, he was beginning to dig his own grave. The first few months felt worth it. John and Eliza lived like late teens. Expensive dinners, impulsive getaways, nights in luxury hotels. She made him feel young, wanted, free. But within 2 years, reality knocked on the door. Eliza didn't want stability. She wanted luxury, unlimited credit, his name to open doors. John started to feel he wasn't loved. He was being used. But by then, he was in too deep. Meanwhile, his business began to collapse. Detached from the company, he over-delegated. A partner betrayed him through dodgy contracts. A multi-million-dollar project in Cincinnati was shut down due to documentation errors, mistakes he'd never have allowed before. He lost investors, racked up debts, had to sell off properties quickly. Mary moved on. The children cut contact. Clara stopped answering his calls. David, when approached years later, simply said, "You made your choice, now live with it." By 58, John was selling the last building in his name to pay taxes and lawyers. Eliza left shortly after, with a cold note about needing someone who could keep up with her pace. The man who once graced magazine covers now lived in a rented flat and drove a second-hand car. His former employees avoided him. In business circles, his name became synonymous with failure. And worst of all, he began to see himself as a mistake. Not for loving, but for confusing desire with redemption. That's where many men lose themselves, my friend. Not in the first mistake, but when they refuse to turn back, to apologize, to admit they were running from themselves, not from their wife or routine. The first few months felt worth it. John and Eliza lived like late teens, expensive dinners, impulsive getaways, nights in luxury hotels. She made him feel young, wanted, free. But within 2 years, reality knocked on the door. Eliza didn't want stability. She wanted luxury, unlimited credit, his name to open doors. When the initial thrill faded, the conflicts began. Jealousy, suspicion, demands for more and more money. John started to feel he wasn't loved, he was being used. But by then, he was in too deep. Meanwhile, his business began to collapse. Detached from the company, he overdelegated. A partner betrayed him through dodgy contracts. A multi-million-dollar project in Cincinnati was shut down due to documentation errors, mistakes he'd never have allowed before. He lost investors, racked up debts, had to sell off properties quickly. Mary moved on. The children cut contact. Clara stopped answering his calls. David, when approached years later, simply said, "You made your choice, now live with it." By 58, John was selling the last building in his name to pay taxes and lawyers. Eliza left shortly after, with a cold note about needing someone who could keep up with her pace. The man who once graced magazine covers now lived in a rented flat and drove a second-hand car. His former employees avoided him. In business circles, his name became synonymous with failure. And worst of all, he began to see himself as a mistake. Not for loving, but for confusing desire with redemption. That's where many men lose themselves, my friend. Not in the first mistake, but when they refuse to turn back, to apologize, to admit they were running from themselves. Not from their wife or routine. At 63, John was living in a small room at the back of a garage, owned by a former employee who still respected him. A mattress on the floor, an old dresser, and a crackling radio that kept him company on cold nights. He had lost everything: money, status, family. But what hurt most was losing respect for himself. One afternoon, walking through downtown Columbus with a plastic grocery bag in hand, he spotted Clara from afar, holding a young boy's hand, his grandson, whom he'd never met. Instinctively, he called out, but she turned her gaze, crossed the street, and walked away in silence. That cut deeper than any betrayal. That night he cried for the first time in years, not from pride, but because he finally understood. What he'd lost wasn't but just an empire, it was the chance to grow old beside those who truly loved him. That's when, slowly, a new path began. John started writing letters, first to Mary, then to Clara and David. He asked for nothing, just shared his story with honesty. Without painting himself as a victim, admitting every wrong step, every lie, every selfish choice. He asked for forgiveness, not to regain anything, but for what he'd destroyed without even noticing. Mary replied months later, kind but firm. She said she'd moved on, that it hurt to remember the past, but she respected his attempt at redemption. David didn't reply. But Clara sent a short letter saying, "You're still my father. I don't know if I can trust you, but if you want to meet your grandson, come Saturday, 1 hour, no promises." He went, wore a pressed shirt, combed his hair, hands shaking. The boy looked at him curiously and asked, "Are you Mummy's dad?" John smiled. For the first time in many years, he felt that maybe, just maybe, there was still something to build, even if small, even if he wouldn't live to see it complete. Not an empire of buildings, but of affection. In the past 2 years, John has lived simply, but with dignity. He didn't rebuild fortunes or make headlines again, but he rebuilt something even harder, himself. He spent Saturdays with his grandson, teaching him how to fix things, telling stories from the days he sold houses and believed the world belonged to those who worked hard. He never spoke ill of Eliza, nor painted himself as a martyr. He'd simply say, "The mistake wasn't loving wrongly, it was stopping loving what was right." Mary never came back, but sent Christmas messages wishing him peace. Clara began allowing longer visits. One day, David showed up with a toolbox and said, "You messed up, but looks like you're trying to get it right now. Let's see where it goes." John learned that forgiveness doesn't come quickly, and not always fully, but it comes. Today, at 65, he lives in a small cottage outside Columbus, grows tomatoes in the garden, listens to the radio at night, and writes letters to men who, like him, once thought they were invincible, until they found out the heart has its own limits. He once told me, over a quiet cup of coffee, "In the end, what remains isn't the wealth. It's the memories, the embraces, and those who stayed when everything fell apart." If you've made it this far, my friend, I truly thank you. May John's story serve as a mirror, not a sentence. Life always offers a final chance, but we must be willing to let go of pride to take it. And remember, asking for forgiveness is not a sign of weakness. It's a sign there's still life inside you. If this story touched you, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on the bell. That way you won't miss the next stories, and you will help other men hear these truths that so few dare to tell.